I was the only one at my husband's funeral. Not our son, not our daughter, not a single friend of theirs, just me standing by his coffin while they posted Facebook photos from a wine tasting. But what I did after seeing those posts destroyed their lives forever. If you've ever felt invisible to your own family, hit that like button right now. Because what happens next will shock you as much as it shocked me. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. This story gets absolutely insane. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how I became the family ATM before you can understand why I finally closed the account. For 47 years, I was married to David, a man who built our house with his own hands and grew a small construction business into the most respected building company in our county. We had 2 kids, Sarah, now 45, and Michael, now 42. And for the last 20 years, I've been their personal bank, babysitter, and crisis manager. It started small, the way these things always do. Sarah needed help with her wedding deposit in 2003. Just $15,000, Mom. We'll pay you back. Michael's startup needed seed money in 2005. It's a sure thing, Mom. You'll double your investment. I never saw a penny back from either of them. But I kept giving because that's what mothers do, right? We sacrifice. We enable. We mistake being needed for being loved. The pattern was always the same. Crisis call, urgent need, immediate transfer, and then radio silence until the next emergency. Sarah's roof, Michael's taxes, private school tuition, car repairs, medical bills. Over 2 decades, I calculated that I'd given them close to $400,000. David warned me. Every single time. Margaret, they're using you, he'd say quietly after I'd hung up from another sob story. They call when they need money, not when they need their mother. I'd defend them. Make excuses. They're busy, David. They have their own lives. They're good kids who just need help getting established. He'd look at me with those patient brown eyes and say, when did helping become enabling? When did love become a transaction? I should have listened to him. God, I should have listened. The first sign that something was deeply wrong came during David's cancer diagnosis. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The oncologist gave us 6 to 8 months, maybe a year with aggressive treatment. I called Sarah immediately. Mom, I'm so sorry, but I'm in the middle of a work crisis. I'll call you back tonight. She didn't call back that night. Or the next. Or the next. I called Michael. His response? Can we talk about this later? I'm about to close a huge deal. David and I went through the entire first round of chemo appointments alone. Every Tuesday for 12 weeks, I'd drive him to the hospital, hold his hand during the 4 drips, and drive him home afterward while he slept in the passenger seat. The kids sent a few texts. How's Dad? Hope the treatment is going well. Thinking of you both. But they never visited. Never offered to help. Never asked what they could do. When David's hair fell out, I was the one who shaved his head. When he couldn't keep food down, I was the one researching anti-nausea remedies. When he cried in the middle of the night from fear and pain, I was the one who held him. Our children were busy living their lives while their father was dying. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March. David was having a particularly bad reaction to his latest chemo cocktail. His temperature spiked to 103, and I rushed him to the emergency room at 2 a.m. Sepsis, the doctor said. We need to admit him immediately. I sat in that sterile waiting room for 6 hours, calling both kids repeatedly. Sarah's phone went to voicemail. Michael's did the same. I sent urgent texts. Dad is in the hospital. Life-threatening infection. Please call. Nothing. Finally, at 8 a.m, I got a text from Sarah. Sorry, Mom. Phone was on silent. How is he? How is he? Your father nearly died, and you want a text update? Michael responded an hour later. Just saw your messages. In meetings all morning. We'll try to call later. He didn't call later. Neither of them did. David spent 5 days in the ICU fighting for his life. I slept in an uncomfortable chair beside his bed, eating vending machine sandwiches and coffee that tasted like dirt. The nurses were kind. They brought me blankets and asked about my children. They must be so worried, one young nurse said. Are they driving up from out of state? Something like that, I lied. On day 3, I saw Sarah's Facebook post. A picture of her at some charity luncheon, champagne flute raised, captioned, supporting women's causes. Feeling blessed and grateful. Blessed and grateful while her father fought for his life. Michael posted too. Golf photos with clients. Closing deals and perfecting my swing. Hashtag blessed life, hashtag work hard play hard. I stared at those photos until my eyes burned. Then I turned off my phone and focused on David. He was all that mattered. He was all that had ever mattered. David survived the sepsis, but the cancer was spreading. His oncologist was gentle but firm. We could continue treatment, but it would only buy us weeks, maybe a month or 2. And those weeks would be filled with pain. David chose to stop treatment. He wanted to die at home, with dignity, surrounded by the things he'd built and loved. I brought him home on a Thursday in June. Our house had never felt smaller or more precious. I set up a hospital bed in our bedroom so he could look out at the garden he'd planted 30 years ago. The roses were blooming, bright red against the white picket fence. I want to see one more summer, he whispered, and my heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I called the kids. Dad's coming home for hospice care. He wants to see you. Sarah said she'd try to visit next weekend. Michael said work was crazy, but he'd figure something out. Next weekend came and went. So did the weekend after that. David died on a Tuesday morning in July, holding my hand while I read him passages from his favorite mystery novel. His last words were, "Thank you for staying, Margaret. Thank you for not leaving me alone." I called Sarah first. She was at her book club. "Mom, can I call you back? We're just getting to the good part." I told her anyway. Dad died this morning. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "Oh. Oh no. I'm so sorry, Mom. What do we need to do? What do we need to do? Your father just died, and you're asking about logistics?" I called Michael next. He was in his car, rushing between appointments. "Mom, can this wait? I'm late for a presentation." "Dad's dead, Michael." He went quiet. Then, Jesus. Okay. Okay. I'll call you tonight." He didn't call that night. The funeral director was patient and kind. He helped me choose a casket, plan a service, write an obituary. David had been specific about what he wanted: simple ceremony, cremation afterward, ashes scattered in the garden where we'd shared 47 years of morning coffee. I sent the service details to both kids. St. Mark's Chapel, Thursday at 2 p.m. Please confirm attendance. Sarah texted back. I'll try my best to make it. Depends on traffic. Michael said he'd be there unless something urgent came up at work. Unless something urgent came up? Your father's funeral isn't urgent enough? Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzling. Perfect weather for a goodbye. I dressed carefully in the black dress David had always complimented, pinned on the small pearl brooch he'd given me for our 25th anniversary. I arrived at the chapel 30 minutes early. The funeral director had done beautiful work, David's photo surrounded by white lilies, his favorite classical music playing softly. I sat in the front row and watched people file in. David's brother Tom, my sister Helen, neighbors we'd known for decades, colleagues from David's construction business. But no Sarah. No Michael. 2 o'clock came and went. The pastor looked at me questioningly. I nodded for him to begin. We gather today to celebrate the life of David William Thompson, beloved husband, father, and friend. The words washed over me. I kept turning to look at the door, expecting to see my children rushing in with apologetic faces and flowers. But the door stayed closed. At 2:30, my phone buzzed. Sarah. Sorry Mom, emergency at Sophia's school. Rain check. Rain check on your father's funeral? At 2:45, Michael texted. Traffic is insane. Don't wait for me. Don't wait for me at your father's funeral. I sat through the entire service alone in that front row, surrounded by everyone who had loved David except the two people who should have loved him most. The pastor spoke beautifully about David's legacy, his kindness, his dedication to family. I wanted to laugh and cry and scream all at once. What dedication to family? What legacy? His own children couldn't spare 2 hours to say goodbye. After the service, people approached me with condolences and memories. David was so proud of his children, Mrs. Patterson from next door said. He always talked about Sarah's success and Michael's business. I smiled and nodded and thanked everyone for coming. What else could I do? Tell them my children thought their father's death was less important than school pickup and traffic jams? I drove home alone. The house felt impossibly empty. David's coffee mug still sat beside the sink. His reading glasses lay folded on the nightstand. His presence was everywhere and nowhere. I poured myself a glass of wine, the good stuff we'd been saving for a special occasion, and opened my phone. Sarah had posted on Facebook 2 hours ago. A photo of her and Sophia at some trendy cafe. Mommy-daughter day. Sometimes you just have to prioritize what matters most. #BlessedMama #quality time. Sometimes you just have to prioritize what matters most. Michael had posted too. Office selfie with his team. Team meeting success. Ready to crush Q3 goals. #hustle hard #business first. Business first. Even before your father's funeral. I sat in David's chair and stared at those posts until the wine glass was empty. Then I opened our filing cabinet and pulled out our will. David and I had been meticulous about estate planning. Everything was divided equally between Sarah and Michael. The house worth $800,000. Our investment accounts totaling $1.2 million. David's life insurance policy for $500,000. Even small things, his tools, my jewelry, family photos. Everything split 50-50 between the two children who couldn't be bothered to attend their father's funeral. I stared at those legal documents until the words blurred. Then I picked up the phone and called our attorney. Robert, it's Margaret Thompson. I need to change my will immediately. Are you feeling as angry as I was feeling right then? If this makes your blood boil, smash that like button. The revenge I got was absolutely perfect, and if you want to see how I completely destroyed their expectations, make sure you're subscribed. Comment below, what would you have done? Robert Chen had been our family attorney for 15 years. He'd handled our house purchase, David's business incorporation, even the kids' college fund setup back when I still believed they'd grow into grateful adults. He met me at his office the next morning, his expression carefully neutral as I explained what I wanted. Margaret, I have to ask, are you sure about this? It's a significant change, and grief can sometimes cloud our judgment. Grief didn't cloud my judgment, Robert. It cleared it. I wanted Sarah and Michael completely removed from my will. Every asset, every account, every possession. I wanted it all to go to someone who actually deserved it. Do you have someone specific in mind? Robert asked. I did. David's nephew Jake, who had driven 6 hours to attend the funeral without being asked. Jake, who had called me every week during David's illness just to check in. Jake, who had helped David with construction projects and never expected payment beyond a home-cooked meal. Jake, who had sobbed openly at David's graveside while his own cousins were posting selfies and complaining about traffic. Jake Morrison, I said firmly. David's nephew. Everything goes to Jake. Robert drafted the new will that afternoon. It was surprisingly simple to erase 20 years of assumed inheritance with a few legal phrases. This is ironclad, Robert confirmed as I signed the final page. No contest clause included. If either Sarah or Michael attempts to challenge this will, they'll receive nothing and be responsible for all legal fees. I felt lighter walking out of that office than I had in months. For the first time since David's diagnosis, I wasn't carrying the weight of other people's expectations. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I cooked a real dinner for myself. Pot roast with vegetables, homemade biscuits, even a small chocolate cake for dessert. I set the table with our good china, lit candles, and ate slowly while classical music played in the background. I was learning to enjoy my own company. 3 days passed before Sarah called. Not to check on me, not to apologize for missing the funeral, but to discuss next steps. Mom, we need to talk about Dad's affairs. Michael and I have been discussing the house situation. The house situation. As if David's death was a real estate transaction. What about it? Well, it's way too big for you now. We think you should sell it and move into one of those nice senior communities. You know, where everything's taken care of for you. Where everything's taken care of. Translation, where you won't need us to pretend to care about you. The house is staying in the family, I said carefully. Right, exactly. That's why we think selling makes sense. We can split the proceeds, and you'll have a nice nest egg for your care facility. Split the proceeds. They were already mentally dividing their inheritance before David was cold in the ground. I'm not moving, Sarah. A pause. Mom, be reasonable. You can't maintain a place that size by yourself. And honestly, Michael and I could really use our inheritance right now. Sarah's dance classes are expensive, and Michael's business expansion requires capital. Our inheritance. Not David's legacy, not his life's work. Their inheritance. I'll call you back, I said and hung up. Michael called an hour later with the same script. Mom, we need to be practical. The house is an asset that should be liquidated. Dad would want you to be taken care of. Dad would want you to be taken care of. From the son who couldn't take care of his father even in death. Have you thought about what Dad actually wanted? I asked. What do you mean? He wanted his children to love him enough to say goodbye. He wanted to matter more than your meeting and her book club. He wanted to know that 47 years of being your father meant something. Silence. Mom, that's not fair. We had responsibilities. So did he. For your entire lives. And he never once chose those responsibilities over being your father. I hung up again. Over the next week, both kids called repeatedly. Their tone shifted from assumption to confusion to frustration. Why was I being so difficult? Why couldn't I see reason? Didn't I want to secure my future? I let their calls go to voicemail. Each message revealed more about their true priorities. Sarah, Mom, I need to know what you're planning. We have financial decisions to make based on our expected inheritance. Michael, this isn't just about you, Mom. We're family. We should be making these decisions together. Family. Now we're family. Not when David was dying. Not when he needed them. Only now, when money was involved. I finally answered Sarah's call on a Friday evening. Mom, thank God. We need to talk. Michael and I are coming over this weekend to help you sort through Dad's things. Sort through Dad's things. Like he was a garage sale. Don't come. What? Don't come to my house. Don't sort through David's belongings. Don't plan my future. Don't pretend to care now when you couldn't be bothered to care when it mattered. Mom, that's not. Sarah, your father died holding my hand while you were at book club. He was cremated while Michael was in meetings. His ashes were scattered while you posted pictures of lunch dates. You lost the right to call yourself his children the day you chose everything else over him. The silence stretched long enough that I thought she'd hung up. Then, in a voice I'd never heard from her before, small and uncertain. What are you saying, Mom? I'm saying you're out of the will. Both of you. Completely. The explosion was immediate and predictable. Screaming about ingratitude, about everything they'd done for me, about family obligations and emotional manipulation. I let her scream. Then I said quietly, everything you did for me? Name one thing, Sarah. Name one thing you've done for me that wasn't preceded by you asking me to do something for you. Silence again. The will is already changed. Jake inherits everything. He's the only one who showed up for David, so he's the only one who gets to benefit from David's life. I hung up and turned off my phone. The peace was immediate and profound. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't wondering when the next crisis call would come, how much it would cost me, whether I had enough in savings to cover someone else's emergency. I was free. Michael showed up the next day unannounced, his face red with anger and entitlement. This is insane, Mom. You can't just cut us out because we missed one event. One event. His father's funeral was one event. Michael, sit down. He remained standing, pacing my living room like a caged animal. Do you have any idea what you're doing? That house is worth almost $1 million. The investment accounts, the life insurance, Dad's business assets, we're talking about serious money. Serious money. Not serious loss, not serious grief. Serious money. I know exactly what I'm doing. No, you don't. You're letting grief make you irrational. We can contest this, you know. No court would uphold a will that cuts out your own children for a cousin. I smiled for the first time in the conversation. Actually, they would. And if you try to contest it, the will has a specific clause. You'll get nothing and pay all legal fees for everyone involved. Robert made sure of that. His face went white. You can't do this. I already did. What about everything we've been through together? What about family loyalty? What about it, Michael? Where was your family loyalty when your father was dying? Where was it when he needed you most? We had obligations. To everyone but him. I stood up. You know what your father used to say? That family isn't who you're related to, it's who shows up. Jake showed up. You didn't. Michael's anger collapsed into desperation. Mom, please. Sarah and I, we made mistakes, but we're still your children. Doesn't that count for something? Being my children counted for something for 45 years. I fed you, clothed you, paid for your education, your weddings, your emergencies. I gave you everything I had. And when I needed you to give me 2 hours to honor your father, you gave me excuses instead. Tears were actually forming in his eyes now. Real tears, not the crocodile variety he'd used as a child when caught misbehaving. We can do better. We can change. You're 42 years old, Michael. If you haven't learned how to love someone more than you love yourself by now, you never will. He left without another word. Sarah arrived that evening with her husband Tom, probably hoping backup would intimidate me into changing my mind. Tom had always been the diplomatic one in the family, the smooth talker who could diffuse tension with charm and logic. But there's no logic that can justify abandoning your dying father. Margaret, Tom began carefully, I think there might be some miscommunication here. No miscommunication. Perfect communication, actually. Your actions communicated exactly where your priorities were. Sarah had been crying. Her makeup was streaked, her hair disheveled. She looked more upset than I'd seen her since she was a teenager. Mom, I know I messed up. I know we both did. But cutting us out completely? That's so extreme. Extreme? What's extreme is asking me for $400,000 over 20 years and never once offering to help when I needed you. What's extreme is treating your parents like an ATM with unlimited credit. What's extreme is prioritizing book club over your father's deathbed. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Maybe there's a middle ground here. Some kind of family therapy or... Tom, with respect, this isn't your family. This is my family. And my family has shown me who they really are. Sarah was sobbing now. I loved Dad. I did love him. Love is a verb, Sarah. Love is showing up. Love is choosing someone's needs over your own convenience. Love is not what you felt. Love is what you do. I can do better, she whispered. You can do better for your own family. You can do better for Sophia. But you can't do better for me. It's too late. They left, and I knew they wouldn't be back. Not to apologize, not to reconcile, not to try to understand. They'd be back with lawyers and legal threats and manipulation tactics. But they'd already lost. I called Jake that weekend. Aunt Margaret, how are you holding up? How was I holding up? No one had asked me that since David died. Not my own children, not until they wanted something. But Jake asked because he cared about the answer. I'm doing better than expected, actually. Jake, I need to tell you something important. I explained about the will, about David's final months, about the funeral, about everything. Jake listened without interrupting, his breathing the only sound on the line. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then, Aunt Margaret, I don't want Uncle David's money if it means you're alone. I started crying then. Not sad tears, not angry tears. Relief tears. Jake, you're not taking anything away from me. You're giving me something back. You're giving me faith that David and I raised at least one child right. But they're your kids. You're my kid too. You're the kid who called during chemo treatments. You're the kid who helped David fix the roof last spring. You're the kid who spoke at his funeral while his own children were posting Instagram photos. Jake was quiet for a long moment. I loved him, Aunt Margaret. He was like a second father to me. I know. And that's exactly why everything should go to you. 3 months later, I was learning to live in a house that finally felt peaceful. Without crisis calls, without constant requests for money, without the exhausting emotional labor of managing 2 adult children who'd never learned to manage themselves. Jake visited every Sunday for dinner. Not because he wanted something, but because he wanted to be there. He helped me organize David's tools, sort through old photos, plant tulip bulbs in the garden for next spring. Uncle David would love seeing you happy again, he said one evening as we watched the sunset from the back porch. I think he would. I think he'd be proud of both of us. Do you ever regret it? Cutting them out? I thought about that question seriously. Did I regret it? I regret that they forced me to make that choice. I regret that they never learned how to love someone more than they love themselves. I regret that David died disappointed in the children we raised. But do you regret changing the will? No. Never. The will reflects reality, Jake. It gives David's legacy to someone who honored him in life and death. That's exactly what a will should do. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the roses David had planted bloom one more time. Next spring, Jake would help me prune them. We'd plant new ones too, varieties that would bloom longer and stronger. Sometimes you have to cut away the dead wood to help the garden grow. If this story gave you chills and you loved seeing justice served, please hit that like button. It helps more women find stories like this. Subscribe for more revenge stories that will blow your mind. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated like this? Your story could be next. Ring that notification bell because you won't want to miss what's coming. The final validation came 6 months later. Sarah and Michael had indeed tried to contest the will, just as I'd predicted. Their lawyer lasted exactly 1 consultation before explaining that not only was the will ironclad, but any challenge would result in them owing legal fees for all parties involved. They dropped the contest. I received one final letter from Sarah, delivered by certified mail. It was 3 pages of self-justification mixed with guilt-tripping and veiled threats. The gist was that I was a bitter old woman who would die alone and unloved. I read it once, folded it neatly, and used it to start a fire in the fireplace. It burned bright and fast, like everything else about Sarah's relationship with truth. Jake had graduated from college by then and was starting his career as an engineer, just like David had always wanted one of his children to do. He moved into David's old workshop space above the garage, converting it into a small apartment. "Are you sure you want me so close by?" he asked. "I don't want to cramp your style." Style. As if a 73-year-old widow had style to cramp. "Jake, having you here is like having David's spirit back in the house. Besides, someone needs to use those tools properly." He was building me a new deck that spring, using skills David had taught him and what David had carefully selected and stored. Every board was placed with love and attention, the way David would have wanted. "You know," Jake said one afternoon as we took a break from construction, "I think Uncle David knew this would happen." "What do you mean?" "The last time I saw him, before he got really sick, he pulled me aside. He said, 'Jake, no matter what happens, you make sure Margaret knows she's loved. Promise me.'" I set down my lemonade and looked at this young man who had kept his promise to a dying father better than that father's own children had. "Did he say anything else?" "He said, family isn't who you're born to. It's who chooses to stay." That evening, I called Robert to make one final addition to my will. I wanted to establish a scholarship fund in David's name, managed by Jake, for young people studying construction and engineering. Kids who understood the value of building something that lasts. "Margaret, this is a beautiful gesture," Robert said. "David would be honored." David built everything in his life to last. Our marriage lasted 47 years. This house has stood for 30. His tools still work perfectly after decades of use. It's time his values lasted too. The scholarship would outlive all of us. Sarah and Michael could post their social media updates and chase their shallow priorities, but David's legacy would be helping young people build real things, lasting things, meaningful things. A year after David's death, I hosted my first Thanksgiving in decades without feeling like I was performing in a play about family happiness. Jake brought his girlfriend Emma, a lovely girl who helped with cooking and actually seemed to enjoy my stories about David's construction projects. We ate dinner at 4 p.m. instead of adjusting for people who would show up late and complain about the menu. We watched football afterward because Jake and David had always bonded over Sunday games. We took a walk around the neighborhood and visited David's grave, where Emma placed fresh flowers without being asked. This was what family felt like. Not obligation, not transaction, not performance. Just love, freely given and naturally received. "Next year, I want to invite some of Dad's old construction crew," Jake said as we cleaned dishes. "The guys who worked with Uncle David. They probably have their own family obligations, but maybe a few would come." "Jake, that's perfect. David would love having his work family here. Maybe Mrs. Chen from next door too. I know she's been lonely since her husband passed." This was how you built community. Not by guilting people into showing up, but by creating space where people wanted to be. That night, I wrote in the journal I'd started keeping since David's death. Just simple entries about daily life, but also about the bigger realizations that come when you finally step out of dysfunction and into clarity. Today I realize that grief isn't just about missing what you've lost. Sometimes it's about grieving what never actually existed. I spent 45 years believing I had loving, grateful children. I grieved when I realized that was never true. But ending that grief makes room for appreciating what is true: Jake's genuine affection, David's lasting influence, my own capacity for joy without other people's approval. I don't think Sarah and Michael will ever understand what they lost. Not the money, that was never really theirs. What they lost was the chance to know their father as an adult, to learn from his wisdom, to be part of something bigger than their own immediate wants. But their loss doesn't have to be my loss anymore. I choose family based on character now, not genetics. I choose love that's demonstrated, not assumed. I choose peace over performance. David always said the strongest foundations are poured one bucket at a time, allowed to cure properly, tested under pressure. That's what we're building here, a foundation that will hold. On the second anniversary of David's death, Jake and I held a small celebration of life in the backyard. Not a morning service, but a celebration of everything David had built that continued to grow. Jake had finished the deck, planted a vegetable garden, and restored David's workshop to working condition. Emma had helped me organize 47 years of photos into albums that told the story of a marriage built on mutual respect and shared work. Some of David's old colleagues came. Mrs. Chen brought homemade dumplings. The pastor from St. Mark stopped by with stories about David's quiet charitable work that I'd never known about. David never mentioned it, Pastor William said, but he paid for 3 families' heating bills every winter for 15 years. Anonymous donations, but I recognized his handwriting on the notes. Jake looked at me with surprise. Uncle David was helping other families heat their homes? He never told me either. That was David, he didn't do good works for recognition. Unlike some people we know, Emma said quietly, and I knew she was thinking about Sarah's social media charity performances. As the sun set and our guests headed home, Jake and I sat on the new deck with cups of tea and comfortable silence. The kind of silence that comes when you don't need to fill air with noise to feel close to someone. Aunt Margaret, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think they'll ever realize what they lost? Sarah and Michael? I considered that question seriously. I think they'll realize they lost money. I don't think they'll ever realize they lost the chance to be loved unconditionally by 2 people who would have forgiven almost anything except complete indifference. That's sad. Yes, it is. But it's not my sadness to carry anymore. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Uncle David used to say that you can't save people from the consequences of their own choices. Smart man, your Uncle David. The smartest. And he chose well when he chose you. I smiled, thinking about a shy young construction worker who had asked me to dance at a church social in 1976. David had been nervous, sweating through his only good shirt, convinced I was too good for him. I'd said yes to that dance, and 47 years later, I was still saying yes to the life he'd helped me build. Not the family I'd thought we were raising, but the family we'd actually created through love, patience, and the daily choice to show up for each other. Jake, there's something I want you to know. This isn't about punishing Sarah and Michael anymore. This is about honoring what your Uncle David built. He built a house that shelters people who need shelter. He built relationships based on showing up. He built a legacy of loving people more than loving things. And that's what you're protecting. That's what we're protecting. Together. The stars came out as we sat there, and I remembered another night, years ago, when David and I had sat in this same spot making plans for the future. We'd talked about retirement, about grandchildren, about growing old together surrounded by family who loved us back. We'd gotten the growing old together part right. The family who loved us back had taken a different shape than we'd expected, but it was real. It was here. It was enough. Jake, your Uncle David would be so proud of the man you've become. I hope so. I'm trying to honor what he taught me. You are. Every day, you are. 3 years later, Jake married Emma in the backyard of David's house. I wore David's mother's pearls and walked Jake down the aisle since his parents had passed away years earlier. The ceremony was simple, honest, full of people who had chosen to love each other rather than people who felt obligated to show up. Sarah and Michael were not invited. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. They had no place in celebrations of love freely given and commitment honored. They belonged in the transactional world they'd created for themselves. Emma's family embraced me immediately and completely. Her parents treated me like Jake's actual aunt, including me in holiday plans and family photos. Her grandmother shared recipes and stories. Her sister asked for advice about her own relationship struggles. This was how family worked when it worked. Not out of duty or guilt or genetic accident, but out of choice and affection and shared values. Margaret, you raised a wonderful boy, Emma's mother said during the reception. Jake talks about David like he was his real father. In every way that matters, David was his real father. Biology is just one way to create family. At the end of the evening, after the last guest had gone home and the dishes were done, Jake and Emma and I sat on the deck drinking champagne and watching fireflies blink among David's rose bushes. This feels like a beginning, Emma said softly. Not just for Jake and me, but for all of us. It is, I agreed. It's the beginning of the family David and I always hoped we were building. Jake raised his glass. To Uncle David, who taught us that love isn't what you feel, it's what you do. To David, Emma echoed, who built foundations that last. To David, I whispered, who chose family based on character and taught us to do the same. We drank to the memory of a man who had loved deeply, built carefully, and left behind people who understood the difference between being needed and being valued. For years after David's death, I received an unexpected phone call. Sarah, speaking in a voice I barely recognized, small, tentative, stripped of its usual demands. Mom, I wanted you to know that Sophia graduated high school. She's going to college in the fall. My granddaughter, now 18, raised by parents who had taught her that love was conditional on convenience. That's wonderful, Sarah. What will she study? Engineering. She says she wants to build things that last. I felt my heart stop for a moment. Engineering. Like David had always hoped one of his descendants would pursue. Mom, she asks about you sometimes. About Grandpa David. She remembers the stories you used to tell her. I waited. Sarah never called just to share information. There was always an ask. She wants to meet with you. Before college. She says she has questions about Grandpa that I can't answer. Of course Sarah couldn't answer them. Sarah had never stayed around long enough to learn David's stories, his values, his dreams for his family. I'd be happy to see Sophia. Really? You would? The surprise in Sarah's voice was telling. She expected rejection because rejection was what she deserved. But Sophia had never abandoned David. Sophia had been a child during his illness and death. Sophia is welcome here anytime. But Sarah, understand, this invitation is for her, not for you. I'm not interested in reconciliation. I'm interested in making sure David's granddaughter knows who her grandfather really was. Silence. Then, I understand. Thank you. Sophia arrived the following Saturday, driving herself in a beat-up Honda that reminded me of the cars David used to repair in the driveway. She was taller than I remembered, with David's steady brown eyes and his careful way of observing before speaking. Hi, Grandma Margaret. Thank you for seeing me. She hugged me carefully, like someone who wasn't sure if she was still welcome but hoped she was. We sat in David's workshop, surrounded by tools that Jake had organized and maintained. Sophia ran her fingers over David's workbench, touching the wood with the same reverence David had always shown for well-made things. Mom said you changed your will. That Uncle Jake inherits everything now. I studied her face. No anger, no entitlement. Just curiosity. Yes. I did. Good. That surprised me. Good. Sophia looked up from the workbench. Mom and Dad spent my whole childhood complaining about money they didn't have but expected to get. It was gross, Grandma. Counting on someone else's death to solve your problems is gross. Smart girl. David's granddaughter indeed. Tell me about Grandpa, she said. The real stories. Not the sanitized version Mom tells when she wants to sound like a good daughter. I spent 3 hours telling Sophia about David. About how he'd built our house room by room, doing electrical work by lamplight after 10-hour construction days. About how he'd taught neighborhood kids carpentry skills for free because he believed everyone should know how to fix what they owned. About how he'd anonymously paid for families' heating bills and car repairs and never mentioned it to anyone. He sounds like Uncle Jake, Sophia said. Jake learned from him. Your grandfather believed in building things that outlast you, structures, relationships, character. I want to be an engineer because of the stories you used to tell me. About Grandpa designing foundation systems, about Uncle Jake learning to measure twice and cut once. Your grandfather would be so proud. Mom said I could ask about college funding. Sophia's voice was careful, neutral. But I'm not going to. I've got scholarships and financial aid figured out. I don't want family money that comes with strings attached. There are no strings attached to loving someone, Sophia. There never should be. She looked at me with those steady eyes. Is that why you cut them out? Because they attached strings? I cut them out because they confused love with transactions. They thought being family meant automatic access to my resources without any responsibility to my heart. Sophia nodded slowly. They do that with me too. Love feels like a business arrangement in our house. It doesn't have to be that way in your house. When you build your own life, you can choose differently. I will. I promise. As she was leaving, Sophia hugged me again, longer this time, tighter. Grandma, would it be okay if I visited sometimes? Not for anything specific, just to visit? Sophia, you're welcome here anytime. Forever. Even though I'm their daughter? You're not responsible for their choices. You're only responsible for your own. She drove away, and I sat on the front porch feeling something I hadn't expected to feel again, hope for the next generation. That evening, I called Jake. Jake, I want to set up a college fund for Sophia. Not through Sarah and Michael, directly to the school. Tuition, books, housing. All of it. Aunt Margaret, that's generous, but are you sure? After everything they did? Sophia isn't them, Jake. She's David's granddaughter, and she has his values. She deserves the chance to build something that lasts. Uncle David would love that. Yes, he would. He always believed in investing in character over genetics. 5 years after changing my will, I realized that the best revenge isn't punishment, it's peace. Sarah and Michael had faded into background noise, occasional updates from mutual acquaintances, distant figures living lives I no longer needed to manage or fund or worry about. Jake and Emma had given me 2 great-nephews who called me Grandma Margaret and actually listened when I told them stories about Great-Uncle David. They helped in the garden, learned to use tools safely, asked thoughtful questions about how things worked. Sophia visited every few months, sharing engineering projects and asking for advice about building a career in a male-dominated field. She had David's determination and his ethical core. She wanted to design sustainable housing for low-income families. I want to build things that help people who need help, she said during one visit, just like Great-Grandpa did. The scholarship fund in David's name had awarded grants to 12 young people studying construction trades and engineering. Each recipient had to submit an essay about building something meaningful, and their responses always reminded me why David had loved his work so much. One young woman wrote about designing prosthetic devices for disabled veterans. A young man described plans for earthquake-resistant housing in developing countries. Another wanted to create apprenticeship programs for at-risk teenagers. David's values were spreading through people who had never met him but understood his belief that skill should serve others, not just yourself. This is what legacy really looks like, I told Jake one evening as we reviewed scholarship applications. Not money passing down family lines, but principles growing in people who will carry them forward. Uncle David's still building, Jake said. Just through other people now. The final vindication came completely unexpectedly, 7 years after David's death. I was at the grocery store when I overheard a conversation between 2 women in the next aisle. One voice was familiar, Michael's ex-wife Jessica, who had divorced him 3 years earlier. I'm so much happier now, Jessica was saying. The constant stress of never having enough money, always counting on his mother to bail us out, it was destroying our marriage. But didn't she leave him everything? The other woman asked. No, she left everything to David's nephew Jake. And honestly? Good for her. Michael and Sarah treated her like an ATM. When their father was dying, Michael couldn't even take a day off work to visit him. He was at some golf tournament with clients. That's terrible. It was terrible. Margaret gave them everything for 40 years, and they gave her nothing back. I'm glad she finally stood up for herself. I finished my shopping in a haze of validation. Even Michael's ex-wife understood what he couldn't see, that love without reciprocity isn't sustainable, and that consequences naturally follow choices. That evening, I called Sophia, who was now 22 and in her senior year studying structural engineering. "Grandma, guess what? I got accepted to the graduate program at State. Full research assistantship studying affordable housing design." "Sophia, that's wonderful. Your great-grandfather would be so proud. I've been thinking about my senior thesis project. I want to design modular housing systems that families can build themselves with basic tools and skills. Sort of like what great-grandpa believed in, empowering people to create their own stability." "That's beautiful. And very much something David would approve of. I know you and Mom and Dad don't talk anymore. I hope that doesn't make things awkward for me." "Sophia, you are never responsible for other people's choices. You are only responsible for choosing who you want to become. And you're choosing to become someone your great-grandfather would recognize and respect." 8 years later, I celebrated my 81st birthday surrounded by chosen family. Jake and Emma's boys, now 7 and 4, helped me blow out candles on a cake Emma had made from scratch. Sophia, now 26 with a master's degree in structural engineering and working on her PhD, brought her fiancé Marcus, a social worker who shared her commitment to serving others. Mrs. Chen from next door was there, along with her daughter who had moved back to help care for her. 3 families from David's scholarship program came, bringing their children to meet the woman who had funded their educations. Pastor William stopped by with his wife, both in their 70s now but still carrying David's message about building community through service. "Margaret, David would be so amazed by what's grown from the seeds you two planted," Pastor William said. "We just tried to live by example. Everyone else did the actual growing. No, you did more than that. You protected what mattered and refused to enable what didn't. That takes tremendous courage." As the party wound down, Sophia approached me with a carefully wrapped package. "This is for you, Grandma." It's not much, but it felt important. Inside was a photo album. The first page showed a picture of David in his workshop, probably taken 15 years ago. The rest of the album documented everything that had grown from his influence: Jake's construction projects, the scholarship recipients' graduations, Sophia's thesis presentation, the great-nephew's learning to use tools safely. The final page held a letter written in Sophia's careful engineering script. "Dear Great-Grandpa David, I never got to know you as an adult, but Grandma Margaret made sure I knew your values. You believed in building things that last. You believed in helping others build too. You believed that love is what you do, not what you feel. I'm writing this in my first apartment, which I built the furniture for using tools Jake inherited from you and skills Grandma taught me you would have wanted me to learn. Every joint is solid, every measurement precise, everything built to last. But more importantly, I'm building a life based on your principles. My fiancé and I are planning a marriage like yours and Grandma's, based on showing up for each other. My career focuses on creating homes for people who need shelter. My friendships are chosen based on character, not convenience. I know Mom and Dad disappointed you. But I want you to know that your legacy didn't end with their choices. Grandma Margaret protected everything good you built and helped it grow in new directions. Thank you for building a foundation strong enough to hold us all. Love, your great-granddaughter Sophia." I read the letter 3 times before I could speak. When I looked up, everyone was watching me with gentle smiles. "Sophia, this is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." Great-grandpa deserved to know that his work mattered. That night, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were done, I sat in David's chair and looked around at everything we had actually built together. Not the family we thought we were raising, but the family we had actually created through years of love, patience, and the daily choice to show up for each other. Jake and Emma's marriage was strong because they had learned to love by watching David and me love each other through illness and health, prosperity and struggle, agreement and conflict. Sophia's career served others because she had absorbed David's belief that skill should help people, not just accumulate wealth. The scholarship recipients were building careers based on service because David's values had been preserved and passed forward. Mrs. Chen felt included in family celebrations because we had learned from David that community is created by choice, not birth. Even Marcus, whom I'd just met, understood that joining our family meant committing to our values of showing up, building things that last, and loving through actions rather than words. This was what success actually looked like, not wealth accumulated or status achieved, but principles lived out in the next generation and the generation after that. I pulled out the journal I'd kept since David's death and wrote one final entry. Tonight I understand what David meant when he said that the strongest foundations are poured one bucket at a time. He and I poured our foundation bucket by bucket for 47 years, love expressed through daily choices, character built through consistent actions, values taught through patient example. Sarah and Michael chose to build their lives on different foundations: convenience, entitlement, the assumption that love should be convenient and loyalty should be profitable. Their foundations cracked under pressure because they were never solid to begin with. But the foundation David and I built held. It held Jake when his parents died. It held Sophia when her parents taught her that love was conditional. It held me when I needed to choose between enabling dysfunction and protecting what David had built. And now it's holding a new generation who understand that family is not who you're related to, family is who chooses to stay, who shows up when it's inconvenient, who loves you enough to tell you the truth, who builds their life to complement rather than exploit your own. David always said that good construction outlasts the people who do it. He was right. What we built together is still standing, still growing, still sheltering people who need shelter. I have no regrets about changing the will. I preserved what deserved preserving and let go of what had already chosen to leave. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. That's not punishment. That's protection. That's not the end of family. That's the beginning of family chosen rather than assumed, earned rather than inherited, demonstrated rather than declared. Tomorrow Jake is bringing the boys to help me plant bulbs for next spring's garden. Emma is teaching me to make her grandmother's bread recipe. Sophia is calling to discuss her thesis defense strategy. Mrs. Chen is bringing soup because she thinks I look thin. This is what it sounds like when love is freely given and naturally returned. This is what it feels like when you stop confusing duty with affection, obligation with love. This is what it looks like when you build family on the foundation of choice rather than genetics, character rather than convenience, presence rather than promises. David, my love, you would be so proud of what we built. It took a different shape than we expected, but it's exactly what you always believed in, something strong enough to last, generous enough to include anyone who chooses to love well, honest enough to exclude those who choose not to. Rest well, my dear heart. Your work is still standing. I closed the journal and walked through the house David had built with his own hands. Every room held memories of love freely given and naturally received. Every corner reflected values that had outlasted the people who first lived them. In the workshop, Jake's tools hung beside David's, organized and ready for the next project. In the kitchen, Emma's bread recipe was taped to the refrigerator beside my own mother's handwriting from 50 years ago. In the guest room, clean sheets waited for Sophia's next visit, and children's books lay ready for the great-nephew's bedtime stories. This was what triumph looked like. Not revenge, not punishment, not getting even. Just peace. Just clarity. Just love finally free to flow where it was valued rather than where it was expected. I turned off the lights and headed to bed, grateful for every choice that had led to this moment, the choice to love David completely, the choice to raise children with intention, the choice to recognize when love was being exploited rather than returned, and finally, the choice to protect what deserved protection and release what had already chosen to leave. Tomorrow would bring new choices. But tonight, for the first time in years, every choice available to me was good. Outside, the wind moved through the trees David had planted, and the sound was exactly like applause.